Hey, what's up, family? It's your boy Frank Luke. Today is a special day. Today is your boy's birthday. So I want to celebrate my birthday with you by starting something I've been saying I'm going to do for a long time. But today is the day. Today is the birthday of reaching you with Frank Luke.
I don't feel in love, but I know who I am.
Years ago, God met me right where I was. I was a well-recognized celebrity barber. I was traveling the world, servicing some of R&B's top artists and celebrities. On the outside, it appeared as if I was very successful, but on the inside, my life was very empty. I was drinking, partying, traveling, doing all the things. And it was at one of the lowest points in my life, God showed me He had another plan. Right there, in the middle of the chaos, He reached out and changed me forever. If God could reach me there, I know He can reach you right here. Let's go. Come grow with your boy. This is Reaching You with Frank Luke. Hey, what's up, family? Like I said, today is my birthday, and I want to celebrate my birthday by stepping out of my comfort zone, getting rid of this imposter syndrome, and doing what God called me to do a long time ago, and that is starting a podcast. And so today is the first day of Reaching You with Frank Luke. And what that is all about is bringing you a message that I believe God has tailor made for me and for many others that will be here to share in a real, relatable, reliable, and a transparent way. We're going to have conversations that are all about connecting Christ to every culture, which is our slogan, where Christ meets culture. Because so many of us have been just conflicted and confused about how Christ fits into our life, and we try to make Christ fit into our life and our culture, opposed to realizing Christ is already there, and all we have to do is embrace Him. And because God has given me a plethora of experiences, I've met countless people from all walks of life and engaged them, and I realize that Christ is able to reach us all right where we are. It's just a matter of us understanding that He can relate to you right where you are. And that's why God has put it on my heart to start this podcast, because from the barber chair, that's the one thing that I have done all my life, especially since I have been on this side with Christ. And that is not just give people a haircut, but get in their head. My motto in barbering has always been, I get in your head in more ways than one. Because I'm not just a barber that gives a quality haircut. I've been a barber that has been a counselor, has been a brother, a friend, a minister, a mentor, a coach. I've done all these things all from the barber chair. And now I am bringing it all to you. So before we go any further, do me a favor. Please like, subscribe, and share, because everybody needs to be a part of what we're doing. Everybody needs to know that Christ is reaching you right where you are. So, as I take my time and introduce what this podcast is all about, at some point we're going to have interviews with people like yourself from all walks of life, just to share their stories and how Christ has been with them through all of the peaks and the valleys of life. But before I do that, I want to give you a little bit background about myself. I want to help you understand me and how Christ was reaching me from a long time ago, and how I believe He is going to continuously use me to reach you right where you are. I grew up in a single parent home, and growing up in a single parent home, it has its challenges. It has its perks like any and everything, but it definitely has its challenges. And so growing up in a single parent home with an older brother and an older sister, and having a hardworking, loving mother, it definitely impacted my life in a major way. Not just because I grew up in a single parent home. So many of us grew up in a single parent home. My single parent home experience impacted me in such a way because I grew up around a lot of violence. There was a lot of violence within my home. Not, I wouldn't say it was a lot of violence within my home, but there was violence. My mother, she married this guy, and this guy used to try to fight my mother. And I say try to fight my mother because my mother wasn't a pushover. My mother has never been one that would just lay down and let somebody hit her or anything like that. But one day I thought he had got the best of my mother, and that night, it shaped me in a way like no other. But not only did I experience violence within my home, I experienced it even outside of my home. And when I was living in Southwest Atlanta, I saw a lot of fights. I saw killings. I saw people get shot. My dad was one of those guys that would fight all the time. Every weekend, he would get drunk and he was fighting his brother, he was fighting his nephew, or fighting someone on the street. It was always something going on that just kept me so disturbed as a kid. And mind you, I'm 5, 6, 7 years old and I'm seeing all of this. I remember very vividly when I was about 9 or 10, I was at my dad's and my dad was drunk and he was fighting his nephew, and his nephew was much bigger than he was, and so he had this big board, about to hit, wanting to hit his nephew, and I run to the front to see what's going on, and I see this outside of my grandmother's home, and then I see my cousin pull her mother's gun out of her purse and point it directly at my dad, getting ready to shoot my dad right in front of me. That traumatized me. If it wasn't for her mom coming and grabbing the gun, she probably would have shot my daddy or her uncle because she was young herself. Who knows where that bullet would have gone? So, this is the type of environment I grew up around. But I can honestly say, I am sharing this platform with you because I am a living testimony that you don't have to look like what you've been through. You don't have to look like what you've been through because the grace of God is always available to reach you right where you are. And so, one of the most trying things that happened in my life, one of the most hurtful and heartbreaking things that happened in my life was one night I was in bed, sleep. And again, I was around 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, no more than 10 years old, but definitely around 8 or 9. And I had only seen my mother actually in a domestic situation a couple of times before this with her ex-husband. Then before I go into the night that really impacted me the most, remember coming home one day and I was walking home from school and my mother was racing down the street in a car she had just bought. And I'm seeing this car and I'm excited to see my mom, coming to get me on my walk home from school. And then she pulls up beside me frantically and says, "Get in, get in." And just as I'm getting in, I realized that my mother had been in a domestic situation. Her lip was busted, her face was scratched up, and her hair was messed up. And my mother had long, pretty hair, long, thick hair. And so I'm like not knowing what's going on. And as soon as I got in the car, her husband at the time was coming in the opposite direction up the street. And my mother grabbed a brick. I didn't even see this brick in the car, but she had a brick ready for him. She grabbed this big brick that she had in the car waiting on him, and she looked and she threw it and she said some choice words and she hit his car aiming at him, and she told him he better not be in the house when she come back. And we raced off and he turned around and he was chasing us. This man chased us all the way to DeKalb County Jail, where my mom pulled up and she yelled to the police officers That's my husband behind me. He just jumped on me. This was an experience that had me so imbalanced. But the one that would really change life and change everything was the night where I was in the bed and I was awakened to my sister beating on the door, beating on the door. And I heard her screaming, wake up, open the door, open the door. And I looked over, and my brother and I, my older brother, he and I shared a room together. And because he's so much older than I am, and he's, seemingly sleeping and not responding, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. And so eventually the door opens and I'm scared because I don't know what's going on. My brother's not moving. My sister's beating on the door, my mother's bedroom door. And lo and behold, the most gruesome thing I've ever seen at this age outside of a movie. It looked like a movie. The door opened. And when you're in these moments where, you know, it's somewhat of a norm to see the violence, but when it's in your home, it's it's never acceptable. It's never something you can fully apprehend. It's like everything slows down. And so this door is opening in a slow manner. And I'm looking and I see my mother. She's the first thing I see. And y'all, even to this day, sometimes when I think about this moment, I just have to pause and thank God. Because when that door opened, all I saw was all this long hair of my mother's drenched in blood, dripping with blood. All I could see was my mother's face covered in red blood. This shirt that she would occasionally sleep in, this oversized t-shirt, was all ripped up and it was full of blood. That was the most petrifying thing I've ever seen in my life for the woman that I love, the woman that has been my rock, my everything, now is covered in blood. And she's carrying her husband out and she's pretty much dragging him out of the room. And then he collapsed. Well, what happened that night? As I said, they had domestic situations, and my mother, she was wanting to leave and she was wanting to get out and she was wanting him to leave, but he wouldn't leave and he didn't want her to leave. And come to find out that night, he tried to kill my mother. He was choking my mother and trying to kill her. And my mother grabs this glass figure that by her bed and she hit him in the head. And when she hit him in the head, I guess they fell on the floor and he was still choking her. And she says, just as she was getting ready to find a piece of the glass that broke after hitting him in his head to possibly stab him to get him off of her, he collapsed because he had lost so much blood. And it wasn't her blood that was all over her, it was his blood. But this is a night that changed my life. This is a night that created this undying desire to be a bigger and better man than my dad and this man that was in our home. But it was also a night that made me feel so insecure, that made me feel angry. And so it just created this turbulence within me where I knew that there was more. I knew it was something more that God wanted me to do. I knew that He had His hands on me, but I just didn't understand how to bring that out. And the reason I knew God had His hands on me, because I got to go back to when I was about 5 years old, maybe 6 years old. And we were living with my grandmother at the time in Southwest Atlanta. And my mother had this friend that was an evangelist. And she called my mother this morning. She called my mother in the wee hours of the night, about 3 in the morning, and she asked my mother to wake me up. She told my mother that God gave her a word for me. And that word that God gave her to me, I'll never forget it because it was an imprint on my life that would get me through moments like what I just shared with you. It would get me through so many other things, and it still gets me through today. This lady said to me, Frank, God told me to tell you that He has His hands on you and that He has a call on your life that is so much bigger than you can ever imagine. And He's going to use you to speak to the world to tell His story. I'll never forget that. And I received that. And that was something that kept me from going too far in life. It kept me striving to know that there was more, even when I had no guidance. And so that's one of the things that has brought me to share reaching you. Because even though I had a challenging upbringing, and it wasn't just the violence, there was something even greater. It's like one thing after another. No matter how good things seemed to be getting at times, there was always something that would throw me off or throw us off. I was an artist coming up, and so I would use my talent to draw to get out of trouble. I would use my talent to draw to be a part of projects and just to um find myself, find some sense of balance because home was very imbalanced to me. I just could not find any real rest. Like I said, it was either my grandmother was fighting, she was beating up her old man. My mother was the neutral ground. She was always the level-headed one, the smart one, the hard worker. And even though she had those domestic situations, she wasn't a violent person at all. And so she was my common ground. But outside of that, I had no clue. I was athletic, but my mother would pull me out of sports either because we couldn't afford it or she just didn't want me to get hurt. And so drawing became my outlet. Drawing from my teachers, drawing from my friends, drawing for myself, drawing became my outlet. And it would go take me so far until I realized I could cut hair. Once I realized I can cut hair and it came natural, that became that thing that was just like that word that evangelist told me years ago. I felt like this is where I was going to be. I designed my own business cards when I was about 12 years old. I drew out Luke's Elite Barbershop and I had some shears going through it. It was dope, y'all. It was dope. As a kid, I drew this and I knew then that this is what I was going to do. I knew then that this is what I was going to do. But I would get another snag. Before I would come into barbering, and that being the avenue that God would use to take me to the next level, there was a illness that I had that no one knew of, no one was aware of, and no one could really diagnose what I had early on because it wasn't familiar to my community. So one day I was in my mother's room and I'm just talking, being me, being silly, doing something, probably acting up some kind of way. And my mother looked at me in a puzzled way and she said, Frank, why are you doing that? And I was like, what? And she said, that. She's just looking at me in a puzzled way. And again, I said, what? And she said, Frank, you don't know what you're doing. Stop doing that. And at that point, as I see my mother getting aggravated with what she sees going on with me, I can now feel it. And what she was seeing, she saw my eyes going up in my head and my head jerking and me making this snarling noise with my nose. And the more attention she brought to it, the harder it was for me to stop it. Well, my mother just knew I was playing. She knew I was doing something to get attention. And then I realized this is what all the teachers were saying because as I back up, I was labeled as having AD back in the day, as ADHD now, but I was labeled as having AD, and the teachers would say I need to be on medication. I was actually held back in the second grade, which devastated me because I knew I was smart enough. And I remember that conversation driving home in my mama's white Ford Fairmont, just crying, begging her not to let them hold me back because I knew I could do the work. My teacher even said I can do the work, but she said it took so much individual time. It took a lot of attention because they had always pulled me out in the hallway or something like that because I was always been a distraction. But come to realize I had this illness that no one knew. And it wasn't AD, it wasn't ADHD. So fast forward back to the present situation I'm telling you about. And my mother is baffled that this thing is going on where my eyes are rolling back in my head is jerking, and I'm making this snarling noise. And she just cannot believe that I can't control this. And I'm telling her I can't stop. So this would go on, and she would meet with my teachers, and my teacher would say, yes, that's what he's been doing. He's been a distraction. So we went to an eye doctor, thought something was wrong with my eyes. That wasn't the case. They prescribed me with glasses I don't need. I'm 52 years old today and I'm just now needing reading glasses. And so I didn't need glasses. I remember them took me to a brain specialist. That didn't work. My mother took me back to the evangelist that spoke a word over me when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I just knew because she spoke that word, I just knew this time of prayer with her was going to be the answer. And that didn't help. It got worse and worse as time went on because if I wasn't outside playing or I wasn't deeply involved or engaged in an activity, this thing would keep happening and I couldn't stop. So one night, my mother, doing all she can do, there was a time where a doctor had prescribed some kind of medication for me and he gave me an amount that was too much and I almost overdosed because we were just doing any and everything to stop. People saying I was only doing it for attention. I wanted attention. And that was messing with my security level. That was messing with my psyche because I knew I didn't want to do it. And there was a part of me that felt like I could control it, but I couldn't. So I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. And, I even at times would laugh it off as if I was, doing it for attention. Just confused and as a kid like what to do with what's going on. So one night my mother, being the mother she is, just determined that she's going to find out what's going on with her child. So we went to Grady Memorial Hospital. Shout out to Grady Memorial Hospital. And they told us, they looked at us, they looked at me, they could not figure out what was going on, and they said that some specialists were going to be in that next day to come back. So my mother said, yeah, we'll be back. And we went back, and I'll never forget this doctor. He just passed recently. God bless you, Dr. Krawiecki. Dr. Krawiecki was his name. I remember this man with this full black beard looking like a Russian or something with this thick black hair, his doctor coat. He's just sitting there and he kind of had a smirk on his face. And he's looking at me doing this. He's looking at my eyes rolling in my head, this snarling noise and jerking. And he's smiling somewhat. And other doctors are standing around him, baffled as like, what's going on? And he asked, he said, you guys don't know what's going on with him? And he was like, no. And then he said it. Then it was like the sky opened up. He said, "This young man has Tourette syndrome." And it was like everybody gasped because my symptoms were a little different. And as I said earlier, Tourette's was not a very prevalent thing at this time in the 80s. It definitely not in my community. Definitely not in my community was Tourette's a thing. And so he identified me as having Tourette's syndrome. And he prescribed a medication for me that was for high blood pressure, but I would take half of it. And this was the first thing that broke me. I was so relieved that somebody with much confidence would acknowledge what I had or diagnose what I had. I was just elated. But I was immediately hurt when I saw my mother's expression because the doctor had pulled her to the side and he said, "Mom, now when I tell you some of the things he's probably been doing throughout his life, you're going to be very hurt because I'm sure you've chastised him for some of these things that he just couldn't help." And he went on to tell about the many things that people with Tourette syndrome will do. And I saw my mother cry for one of the few times that I've ever seen her cry. And she shed a tear because she realized she shed a tear and fought back the rest because she realized, forgive me, she realized when I was crying, pleading not to let them hold me back, the times she may have whooped me, the times people may have judged me saying that I was playing or doing things to get attention, it was because I had this illness that no one knew of. And so I wasn't crying then, but it just hurts me to know that years I went through not knowing how to deal with the situation, not knowing what to do, and my mother going through being this single mother doing her best trying to raise three kids. It just hurts to know that you can have something going on in your life and you don't know what to do about it because you don't even know what it is. But here's again why I am here today. Because if it had not been for God who was on our side then, I don't know where I would be now. And so this doctor, he prescribed this medication for me and it worked. It would suppress the symptoms. And he told my mother, that there is no cure for Tourette's. This is something that he would always have, and he'll probably have to take this medication if he wants to suppress the symptoms. My mother said to me when we left that hospital, she took the medicine, we got the prescription, it worked. I remember my mother saying to me, "Frank, you won't be on this medication long." God is going to heal you. And so I stand before you, or I sit before you to tell you that for 40 plus years, I have not had any symptoms of Tourette syndrome, and I'm not on any medication because God reached out to me even then. And that is why I'm so passionate about living and loving and leading for God. I'm not perfect. I don't get it right all the time, but those are moments that God has met me right where I was, even while I was a sinner, for such a time as this. And I know that he's going and he is reaching out to you in the same. So I won't bore you too much longer talking about me and the things that I've gone through, but I have two more things I want to share with you. And In the following episodes, we'll talk about more. But many things have happened in my life that have just been life changing. And like I said earlier, I'm grateful. I don't look like anything I've been through because of the hand of God on my life. March 7th of 1998, when God was a day that God would make sense out of so much of what I've gone through. The gambling, the women, the violence, the highs, the lows, God would bring it all together. By this time, I am well into my barbering. Like I told you earlier, barbering became a vice for me. It became my outlet. It became my Superman cape because I was naturally good. As a young kid at 16 years old, I had the opportunity to work in a barbershop on the west side of Atlanta. They were comparing me to one of the better barbers in Atlanta. On the east side of Decatur, I was being compared to one of the better barbers in barbershops. I'm cutting hair in my school. I'm cutting all my principal's hair. I'm cutting my coach's hair. I'm getting passes to get out of class to cut hair. I, I used to be angry because I didn't stick with football because my mother, she would pull me out early and I just didn't have that confidence to step into that, but I knew I was very athletic. And so I was angry that I didn't fulfill that. But barbering replaced all of that. I was cutting all the many of the football players' hair. I was just a man when it came to cutting hair. And God would open up a door that no man can shut. But before March 7th, 1998, God opened up a door for me not just to be a barber that was well recognized in my school and my community. God opened up the door for me to become an official celebrity barber. I was at my best friend's house. This is like my brother. We grew up together and we were downstairs in his basement and I was cutting hair in his basement, shooting pool. And his brother was the same age as my brother. So he was like my big brother and he was gone all the time. I didn't know where he was. He had went off to the military and I didn't see him after that for a while. And I heard him ask upstairs. He was like, Frank downstairs? And I was like, man, he's here. So he ran downstairs and all I heard him say was, are you ready? I'm like, ready for what? Next thing I know, here comes this guy with this big 8 ball leather jacket. 8 ball was the brand back in the day. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. If you had a genuine 8 ball jacket, you were doing something. So he had that on this big 8 ball jacket. He had this gold herringbone necklace with diamonds in it. He had a gold herringbone bracelet with diamonds in it. I mean, real diamonds, not dope boy diamonds that I was used to that were cloudy. These diamonds were sparkling with no light. And so he comes downstairs, and lo and behold, it's Keith Sweat. Keith Sweat came downstairs because my best friend's older brother was his tour manager. And he was in town getting ready to go on a tour and he needed a barber. And I had my first celebrity to be a multi-platinum selling artist. So I cut Keith Sweat's hair. Now, granted, any platform you might see him on, he's going to embellish the story to say that I messed him up and I had him looking crazy on tour. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. I say that bad because I was nervous. I've never seen a celebrity like this. I've never cut a celebrity's hair. And so it wasn't the best. I can honestly say it wasn't the best. But that opened up my eyes in a way like never before. Here it is, this young boy out of Atlanta cutting hair, and all I wanted to be was just the best barber in my community. That's as far as my mindset went. I just wanted to be successful beyond what I saw. I saw dope dealers, I saw alcoholics, I saw people who were doing something, working a job, and I just wanted to be successful. I didn't go to school, college, that is. I didn't go to college. I had dropped out of high school to get my GED, and and let me just kind of put a disclaimer in there. I didn't drop out because I, couldn't do the work. When I was held back early in my years, I knew that if I couldn't graduate with my class, I was not going to graduate with any other class. And so when it came time for my class to graduate, I graduated with them by saying, I'm not coming back. I'm going to get my GED. And that's exactly what I did. And I went on to college from there at some point. But that's how that was. That's why I never got a high school diploma, because I chose that I was going to finish the year that I was supposed to finish. So, anyway, that's all I wanted to be. I just wanted to succeed beyond those decisions that I made. And I wanted to succeed beyond the environment that I grew up in. And I was doing that. And so to become the barber of such a world renowned artist like this, I knew that couldn't be nobody but God. And so I would become Keith Sweat's barber. That would open up a door for me to travel the world. I've been everywhere. Before I was 22 years old, I probably had traveled over 30 or more states within the United States. By the time I was 23, 24, I had been overseas. And so I knew this was God. I was cutting different celebrities, Silk, LSG, Belle Biv DeVoe. There are many that I can mention that I've have serviced throughout the years, and I give God all the glory for the opportunity. But none of that compared to March 7th, 1998. I was this celebrity barber that my community, my family revered. I loved it. It allowed me to do things that I never imagined doing, but there was still such a void in my life. I had such a void because I knew there was something more. Even in cutting hair, wherever I would go, either I was inspiring someone because it was something in me that I wanted to share with them, or someone, a stranger, was coming to me because they say they saw something in me and I was inspiring in that way. But I was still living a life that I was in the strip clubs 2 and 3 times a week. I was gambling. I was drinking occasionally. I was just living a life that I thought I really wanted to live. And it wasn't until this day, on March 7th, 1998, I had met a young lady that I wanted to talk to, but she wouldn't give me the time of day to talk to me because she was really into the church. And I used to wear earrings. I used to wear diamond earrings or these hoop earrings, and that just was such a turnoff to her. She was like, "Oh no, I can't date you. You wear earrings." And so I was like, "I take them out for you." And so I took them out. I took the earrings out for the first time just to try to date this girl, but she still wouldn't hang out with me because she said that I wasn't saved. I wasn't living a life that she was living. And I knew that was my opportunity to get what I felt like God was always pulling out of me, but I just didn't know how to attain it. And one day I asked her to pray for me. And she prayed for me, and she prayed the prayer of salvation for me. And that night, I really didn't feel it. I was on the phone and I didn't feel it. I wanted something that would change me. I wanted something that would be so much different than what I've experienced. Because this life of traveling and having money and being recognized was infectious. And I wanted something. I needed something that was bigger than that. And so I told her I still don't feel it. And so I said to her, I'm just not feeling it. I'm really not feeling it. And she said, "No, you got it. I heard it. I feel it. I know you have it. You just cannot let the devil rob you." And so I hung up the phone with her and I walked up the stairs to my bedroom. And I said, "God, if you're real, I need to feel you. I need to see you. I need to know." And I lifted my hands up and I said, "Come into my life." And at that moment, something grabbed my stomach and it propelled me to pray in this unknown tongue that I had never done in my life. I heard this evangelist lady do it before, but I had never tried it or done it anything like this in my life. And it just started to flow uncontrollably. And that was the day, March 7th, 1998, that my life changed forever. Even though my life changed in a way where I knew God had met me right where I was, I knew God had called me and He had met me in the prayer that I prayed, the enemy was still close. That weekend, my best friend, my brother, who was running this club at the time, called me to say, come down, because there was a young lady there from out of town that I had been trying to talk with for a while. And I'm trying to make all kind of excuses because I don't want to tell them I just gave my life to the Lord, because I'm still wrestling with this moment. But at the same time, I'm like, is it corny for me to, say that I'm saved now? But anyway, I finally had to tell him because he was just so persistent in me coming. And when I told him that I couldn't come because I had just given my life to Christ, he paused for a second and he was like, wow. Man, I'm proud of you, bro. I really am. And then the next words out of his mouth was, man, you need to repent tomorrow and come now because this girl is looking good. And that was my first test. That was my first real test coming out of the gate. Coming out of the gate of being a Christian, God tested me with the very thing that I was lusting for the most, the very thing that I was craving for the most. And I realized that when you make a step towards God, God would make 3 or 4 steps towards you. And so this is in part why I bring to you Reaching You, because I have been a celebrity barber. I have been a local barber. I have visited strip clubs. I've drank, gambled. I've done it all. I've done many things. I can't say I've done it all. And God has been with me through it all. And not only that, as a barber, I've had the privilege of seeing and meeting and engaging and interacting with so many people from all walks of life: celebrities, entrepreneurs, blue collar workers, janitors, you name it. I've been able to connect with them and hear their stories. And now I want to share that with you. This is why the you in Reaching You is in all caps. Because even though I just shared my story, and there's so much more to come, as I will talk about experiencing my brother's death, as I talk about how divorce changed my life for the better and the worse. But the you in Reaching You is in all caps because my story is much like your story. It may not be exactly the same, but if it is not my story, it's somebody that you will be able to relate to here at Reaching You. So join me as we continue to connect Christ with the culture and let God change us one person at a time. God bless you.